500 years ago, he washed ashore the sole survivor of a shipwreck. And upon the skull of the man who killed his dad, he said, "I'm mad, I must eradicate piracy, injustice and cruelty, and all my sons will follow me, so evildoers will believe that this man cannot die."
The Phantom!
The ghost who walks.
The Phantom!
Enemies beware, the Phantom's always there, but you won't find the Phantom. He finds you.
G'day everybody, and for those who have come in late, you're listening to the X-Man the Phantom podcast. My name is Jermaine, and tonight I am joined by Dan. How are you, buddy?
Really good, Jermaine, really good. Other than the fact that my school holiday's finished tonight and I'm back at work tomorrow, so I'm well rested and ready to attack 2018.
So no better way to start the working year than a late night doing a podcast.
Exactly right. I wouldn't have it any other way.
Yes, that's it. So tonight's a very special occasion for us. We have already had a wonderful view of this person's collection, and it was just a tiny little bit, which we will be posting up. But before we do that, let's introduce the man. And now, I've known Pete for a little while. I was lucky enough to meet him once when he came to Australia, and of course, he is a friend of the Phantom, which I'm sure everyone will agree. Pete Klaus, how are you, buddy?
Let me say to my Australian brother, "G'day, mate."
Perfect.
I'm doing fine, doing great.
That's good. So thank you for joining us, Pete. So I guess we'll just get straight into it. Like we said in the intro, we've got a whole bunch of questions here. So
I'm ready.
Yeah, let's just go for it, and then we'll probably get off on some tangents, but that's all part of the experience. And thank you for joining us, and let's get stuck into it.
Okay.
So Pete, I guess how did you become a fan?
I became a fan at a very young age because my mother had one sister, and her sister owned a farm. Basically, she sold eggs to people that just stopped by. One of the guys that would get eggs every day from my aunt was a guy who distributed comic books to various stores in the Baltimore area. And she had 7 sons. So this guy was nice enough to give her a stack of comic books every week, starting back probably in the late 40s or early 50s. When her boys would read them, they brought them to my brother Joe, my brother Billy, and myself. So it included the early Superman, Batman, all the ones that are worth money now that I no longer have. But I had the occasion to see some early Phantoms, and just one comic did it for me. I looked in the newspaper every day for this mysterious purple-clad figure riding this beautiful white stallion with his hidden headquarters in the jungle with the just fascinating skull cave. It just took me by storm. And I couldn't read at the time. I was 4 years old, was starting. And I would ask my mother to help me read it. And she says, "Well, I have to cook." Because we have a big family. She said, "You're going to have to learn to read yourself." So she helped me, of course. But before I got to 5, I was reading The Phantom every day. So that was the start of it. And my interest in comic books came about because of my connection with my aunt bringing the free comic books. And then I worked at 14 years old at a drugstore who had a lot of comics, and I could read them without paying for them. So that's how my interest got started.
So, are you just a Phantom fan, or do you collect other stuff as well?
Well, I do, but nothing like the Phantom. there was a character you may or may not know because you're younger than I am, but back in 1948, of course, I didn't know her then. I was born in 45. There was a character, comic character by the name of Little Lulu by Marjorie Henderson Buell.
Yeah.
And my uncle used to get these comic books, and that's basically what his kids read. And when I'd come over, I'd read them, and I got hooked on them because the character Little Lulu was so well written by artist writer named John Stanley. So I figured, well, I had 2 girls and I have a son. Peter would get my Phantom collection, and Jennifer and Lindsay would get the Little Lulu collection. Well, as it turned out, Peter liked X-Men. He likes the Phantom, but he really liked X-Men and Star Wars. And my girls could care less about Little Lulu. But I collected every Little Lulu comic that was ever printed in the United States from 1945 through, I think the last one was printed in 1982. So I had everything. So thinking about that, about 2 weeks ago, believe it or not, I sold the whole collection.
Oh.
My girls weren't interested. It would give me spending cash to buy Phantom original art.
Yeah.
And as you know, and other pieces, 3-dimensional pieces. And I was ready for it. I have all the stories in reprint. So I have a few, maybe a handful of the Lone Ranger. I have a handful of Tarzan. And about a year and a half ago, I sold 18 boxes of these, what they call Golden Age comics, because I kept the box for myself just to reminisce. And the original comic books I sold to a guy in Georgia who was interested. But yes, I had other characters I liked, but nothing like the Phantom.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome.
So, for people and who have come in late to Phantom collecting, or and we just spoke earlier, I've sort of only come back into the fold in the last probably 5 or 7 years in a serious sense. And getting to know, I guess, a bit about the legend of Pete Klaus. One of the things that I read today was that, and it was written by Ed Rhodes in one of the Friends of the Phantom newsletters, that Pete is the world's premier Phantom collector and possesses more knowledge about the toys and the character than anyone. So that's probably from about 15 years ago, I suppose, or so.
Yes, it's all ago. Let me tell you how I met Ed Rhodes. Had been collecting the Phantom for a number of years, and I get a telephone call out of the clear blue. Guy introduces himself as Ed Rhodes, a teacher out of Catawissa, Pennsylvania, which is a rural area in central Pennsylvania. By the way, Catawissa means, it's an Indian word, and it interprets from in English to fat Indian. So it must have been good hunting up there. But it's a rural area, and Ed said, I heard that you have a lot of Phantom comic strips cut out of the paper. And I said, I have a fair number. He said, may I buy some? I said, you could, but I'd rather give them to you. And he said, oh, man, thanks. Because I had them in comic book form. I kept a handful, and that's how we got to be friends.
Oh, wow.
So, were you? How did he come to just call you out of the blue? Were you well known as a collector in that time, or pre-internet era? How did people in America become aware of each other as Phantom fans and collectors?
Okay, I'll tell you. I used to go to every comic show, toy show, and I'd introduce myself to the people that carried the kind of merchandise that I was looking for, whether it be a toy dealer or a comic book dealer, and I introduced myself as Pete Klaus, the Phantom Man. So they would take my number if they found something, and so everybody had my telephone number. And when Ed was inquiring at a show about Phantom comic strips, guy gave him my number, and he said, you have to call this guy. He has a lot of material. So in less than a year, Ed drove down with his wife because his mother was dying of cancer. Here he would have come right down. So about a couple months after his mom passed, he and his wife, his daughter, and his youngest daughter, who was just an infant at the time, her name is Renee, they came to my house, and of course I filled them up with some Phantom goodies. And the very first day that he met me, he'd never seen me. He got a picture of me somewhere, and he did a portrait of me as the Phantom. And he was spot on. I don't know how he did it, but I still have that painting. That's how.
He was a talented artist, Ed.
He really was. He was more talented in the area of facial portraits than I would think. He knew his anatomy, but the problem that I saw when you compare him to like the real good Phantom artists is that the body of the Phantom did not flow like a Cy Berry or a Luke McDonald. But Ed could do a face with the best of them, I think.
Yeah.
My personal opinion. I have a lot of his work in my collection because we were friends.
Yeah,
So
he gave me a portrait of the Phantom. I think it was in charcoal, and it's very nice.
He's excellent. Yeah, he did a real nice portrait of. This is prior to the movie of Billy Zane as the Phantom for me, which gave me like a sneak preview of what he would look like. So it's very good.
So, do you remember when that was? Like, I seem to remember that you guys founded the Friends of the Phantom fan club in the early 90s.
It was actually before that. I met Ed around in 88, 89. He called me. I can't remember if it was 88 or the end, but it was near December. I remember that. We just had a good friendship after that. See, here's the story. About 5 years prior, or maybe even 6, I wanted to meet other Phantom fans in the States. And I did belong to, or I knew John Henderson from the first Phantom Club. And I asked him if he'd be so kind enough to give me the names of people that, received his newsletter that lived in States. We sent me a list of about 20 names and numbers. And most of the numbers were wrong because I guess people moved or changed locations, but 5 of the numbers I called, and the most important call that I made was to Bob Griffin. Bob
yes.
English professor that lives in western Michigan, has been a Phantom fan since he could walk, and still has all of the newspaper clippings from the earliest Phantom pages, and probably the oldest collector that I know of just sheer Phantom stuff. And he's very articulate anyway, but I called Bob, and we got to be great friends. And when he told me he had 2 original Ray Moores, oh man, I was thinking in my mind, what can I do to buy one?
Yeah.
He very politely wrote back, he said, Pete, you'll be able to understand this. He says, these were given to me by the wife of a art dealer in Chicago, and they're like my children. And, I couldn't tell my children. I said, well, I certainly understand. I said, but I had to ask.
Yeah, of course.
And he suggested that we start a club, start a newsletter. And I was all for that, but he was teaching and his schedule was full, and I was teaching and my time was full, and we were thinking about it over the summer. In that interim, we got to know Ed Rhodes, and Ed really wanted to start one. But prior to Ed Rhodes, what did I want to say? Bob Griffin and I found that Lee Falk was coming to New York. Bob couldn't make it, but I was hell bent on meeting Lee Falk. So that was like probably a little bit before 1989 maybe. And I went up by train with another collector friend. He was into Superman or something. So I waited for Lee Falk. Probably I waited 3 hours, just wanted to see him. And they finally opened up the room where he was going to speak. And I got a front row seat. And I had something that I had made. It was a Lifetime Achievement Award with a nice shot of the Phantom on it to Lee Falk for his outstanding contribution to comic industry. And I told the moderator, who's a very famous guy too, and his name eludes me, but he had written a lot of prefaces for the Phantom paperbacks by Avon.
It wasn't Ron Goulart?
Ron Goulart, yeah. And Ron said, why don't you, after we have the introduction, come up and present Lee with this. He'll really like it. So I'm waiting here, and I got my little plaque, and here comes a real elegant, thin, almost like a movie director type with an ascot and a cane and a dapper Panama hat, and I knew that was Lee. And he sat down and waiting for this to get started, and like everybody was looking, and seemed like everybody was afraid to approach him. But I said to myself, damn it. He said, I came so long and waited too long to meet him. I'm going up and introduce myself, and I did. I said, hi, Lee. I said, my name is Pistol Pete Klaus from Baltimore. He said, how'd you get that name, Pistol? I said, they were from my basketball days. I could knock them in with the best of them. So he just laughed, and he said he actually worked in Baltimore for the News American newspaper for a while as a writer. So that was pretty cool. So we had a little connection. And from that time on, Lee and I had been good friends and conversed and talked often on the phone.
Wow.
What the point I wanted to make that I veered away from was that Bob and I did want to start, or we didn't know what to put on that plaque. Who was it from? We didn't want to say from Bob Griffin and Pete Klaus. Yeah. So I came up with the name Friends of the Phantom. So we were the two early Friends of the Phantom. About a year later, we met Ed Rhodes. We came up with Ed Rhodes, and I introduced him to Bob, and he said, I'd like to start a newsletter. And just prior to the newsletter, Jim Shepard was coming to New York to sign some contracts at King Features, and also to get some information from Bob Griffin, some old newspapers that he needed for a story. And they got to be good friends, and he invited Bob to have lunch with Lee. And he asked Lee if I could come. And then I suggested to Bob, let's call Ed Rhodes, because he would come also. So we did, and that was kind of like the start of the Friends of the Phantom. But it really wasn't until Ed did the newsletter that the club really blossomed. That's really how it all went down. There was a big stink between Bob and Ed about, the origins of the Friends of the Phantom. But, all that stuff is not important to me. The Phantom is, in friendship, what he stands for.
Yeah.
So you became so you're one of the three of you then are the founding members of the Friends of the Phantom fan club.
Exactly. Originally it was Bob and I called Ed in because he wanted to do a newsletter.
Yeah, okay. And that gave something, I guess, tangible for other people who wanted to join the club to say, yeah, this is what we've got.
Yeah, and then people that we met that got in touch with us, she said, well, we're starting this newsletter.
Yep.
And we had a chemist out of New York that had, I don't know, a lot of original, even a Ray Moore, a lot of Wilson McCoy art pieces, as well as every Phantom comic book and Ace comic book that he was in. And I thought that was kind of neat. And then we had a Dr. Todd Goldberg, who was a head of geriatrics And Lee was quite interested with him because Lee was getting up in age, and of course he wanted his faculties sharp. So he was asking him all kinds of questions. Well, how can I stay younger? And I think Todd's answer was just keep doing what you're doing.
Yeah.
And so when did Chris Smith become a part of the club as well? Because he's another fairly big name.
Well, yeah. I didn't know Chris Smith at all. He got in touch with Ed. I saw the newsletter or heard of the newsletter. And I get a call from Ed Rhodes. He said, Pete, he said, I made contact with a guy named Chris Smith who lives in California. And he had something in common with both of us. And I said, what's that? He said, he plays the guitar. And he said, I play the guitar and you play the guitar. Of course, different venues. Ed was more rock and blues, and Chris was, I think, a blues guitarist or a jazz player. And I was more of the folky type, you know, John Denver and Peter Palmieri, and that, because it's the era I grew up in. But we had the guitar in common, and we had the Phantom in common. So he introduced Chris to me, and then Chris had all these grandiose ideas of writing a book and getting in touch with people and getting, getting to know exactly what was out there and buying things. That's a relation with Chris Smith. And I sent him some good stuff. I gave him some original art and different things that he asked me for. But I haven't heard from him in the last probably 5 years.
Okay, yeah, no, I haven't heard. He's kind of a lot like John Henderson from the Phantom Club. He just kind of disappeared. And
I do know this. He was married to a black lady, African American, and had a blues club in the Oakland area of California. And they divorced or separated. I don't know the reason. Probably his Phantom collection. He was buying and she was supplying, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
And, he did acquire some great stuff. And about a year ago, I saw some of he got into making Phantom statues. He was trying to palm off. They were okay. In fact, I still have one of the Phantom running, just to have one. And I noticed they were on the internet for sale, and I dropped the seller a note, and I said, Chris, haven't heard from you. How are you doing? But he never replied. I know he got the message, so he wants to remain anonymous, I guess. And I don't know if he's in Tasmania or if he's in California, to be honest.
I know John Cookson, when he went to America for his honeymoon, actually, he went and saw Chris Smith's collection.
It was, if I have it on video.
Yeah.
Now, he probably doesn't have it anymore because with the breakup, I think he had to sell a lot of stuff.
Yeah, okay.
That's all I know.
Yeah, so with your collection, do you focus on anything particular, or are you just more of a kind of like anything you can grab?
Everything. To answer your question, one of the things two areas I was very interested in. I had a number of Phantom Halloween costumes. I was interested when the first Phantom Halloween costume came out in the U.S. and how many there were. There were actually two major companies, Collegeville and Cooper. Yep. Collegeville is a little town in Pennsylvania that actually started out making flags from all over the world and eventually got into the children's costume making business, and they did characters like Bugs Bunny and Superman and every character available. But I start looking for any show that I ever went to for Phantom costumes. And over the years, I think I found every one. They originally had a skin tone on the face, and all of them slipped on. You slipped your legs in them
Yep.
and your arms, and it tied in the back, and it had a graphic of the Phantom on the front, and maybe a hint of the boots that were like lithographed on, and then you'd just wear black shoes and you'd look like you were dressed as a Phantom. And then around in the mid to early 1960s, they start making the mask of the Phantom a green color. And the reason for that is that the little kids would go trick-or-treating at night, door to door, and here in the States, and this green would reflect off the car headlights or other lights. So I didn't really like that because it made the Phantom look like an alien.
So you're saying that the purple was actually really good camouflage?
Oh, yes.
Because that's a common criticism. So yeah. I'm really pleased to hear that it turns out purple's a really good color if you want to hide in the darkness.
That's right. I asked Lee Fuchs the very first time I met him, I said, Lee, I said, I understand that the Phantom's color is purple here. And I noticed in my comic books in Italy, some areas in South America, in Mexico, and in France, in Greece, and a few other countries that his costume is red. And in Sweden and the Scandinavian countries, and some of the places in near Russia, his costume was blue. He said, well, Pete, he said, back when we first started doing the Phantom, Italy actually produced the first comic book, and they wanted original art. So art was sent to them, to Italy, but we didn't send them a color scheme. So what they did, they used a color that they thought would look good in comics. So actually the Italian companies came up with the red color. And as the stories were sold around to Mexico, South America, they printed them from what Italy had. So that's why some of the countries did red. I assume that in Sweden they wanted a more mysterious look for the costume. And of course, Lee thought that his original idea was gray, to have him vanish like smoke in the jungle. But it wasn't really a good color for comic books. So that's why I think we have all the three different major colors of the Phantom.
And so, do you still read the comic books, Pete, or the newspaper strip?
I do. When the late Paul Ryan was alive, I used to talk to him quite often, and he actually put me in 3 stories. I got the hell beat out of me again by our purple-clad hero.
You've been in a number of stories, haven't you?
I'm about 12. Hans Lendl did one called The Zombie Gang, and none of these artists really met me other than Cy Berry, so he had to use photographic reference. And I'll tell you how the stories came about. But I remember Ulf Kronberg was a close friend of mine. When he would come to the States, I invited him to Baltimore, and we would go around, and we had a lot of good adventures. Went to Fort McHenry, home of the Star-Spangled Banner, and we went to weddings together, and so we got to be pretty close. And I think he asked both Hans Lendl and Cesar Spadari, who did a really good rendition of Ed and I in a book called The Mystery in Baltimore.
Yeah, was that the Alan Edgar Poe?
Edgar Allan Poe, yeah. By the way, that story had some truth to it. Every year, I think in May, at the grave of Edgar Allan Poe, they leave a bottle of cognac and flowers, and it's a mysterious person. And that's kind of what the story was about, part of that. So I've been in, Felming has done me in 3 stories. Graham Nolan did me in 3 stories. And our the last Phantom artist that put me in the story was our friend that just passed away,
Paul Ryan.
Paul Ryan.
Yeah. So
Yeah, he did you in the did you in the what was it, the Empty Throne saga? I think it was the first part. You were the the college phys ed teacher.
That's right. Yeah. So I mean, the best one I think, or my favorite one, was one that Fellman did, and on the splash page of the comic, all the characters are in small ovals, and he's got my face in there, and underneath for my name it's Klaus, but it's the way he had me. Klaus was my first name, like a surname, a German surname, and story about George Clooney, I think, but he couldn't call him Clooney because of rights, and gave him another name.
That's got to be a massive thrill to be depicted in a Phantom story.
Yeah, because I love the Phantom so much, and my family loved it.
Yeah.
And I'll never forget. I think it was around 2004 or 5. Graham Nolan did one called The Briefcase. It was a story where Ed Rhodes and I were both in the story, and 3 crooks robbed the bank, but one of the crooks was kind of repentant and took the briefcase of money. And Ed and I were hunting for him in the jungle. And the Phantom's children were just playing around in the jungle, and they see this guy with a briefcase. And then he puts his finger over his lips, I think, and tells them, don't say anything. And then Ed and I come in, and we said, have you seen so-and-so? And they said no. And evidently they eventually find out, and I'm getting ready to shoot Kit, and the Phantom comes in and shoots a gun out of my hand and beats the hell out of Ed and I, and we're in prison with skull marks on our face. It was a thrill. It was a thrill for kids to see in school, but they thought I was bad because I had a gun.
I was going to say, were you always the bad guy in these? You always getting the heck beaten out of you?
One of the stories that I'm trying to think who did that one. I think it was Cesar Spadari. He put me in the second part. It was 2 different artists doing this long story, and I was a bad guy in part of it, and then I eventually helped the Phantom.
Right.
And I kind of repented. That was the only time that I was good in all the stories, so I'm look like a bad guy.
You just must have a face like a roughneck.
Yeah, I did. And I used to box a little when I was younger, too, so I guess that's part of it. That's the big cauliflower ears and the pug nose. So. And the Phantom is rough on roughnecks, as you know.
Yeah, that's it. So, who would be your favourite authors and artists, and then have you got any specific stories about any of them or anything you want to share?
Well, my favorite artist of all time is Cy Berry. I think he, to me, epitomizes what the Phantom should look like. It was very consistent, and the thing I like the most, as much as, Wilson McCoy and Ray Moore were the history of the Phantom, and hey, don't get me wrong, I loved everything about them. Cy Berry brought the Phantom to life. He made it like, hey, that could be a real person. That looks like a real person.
Yeah.
And it was funny, I was talking to Ulf Gronberg about that about 15 years ago, and he said that he used to read the Phantom as a young boy, and they were reprinting a lot of Wilson McCoy stuff and Ray Moore stuff in Sweden. And when Cy Berry started drawing, he got a renewed interest, sort of like, started all over again. Then eventually he got the job as the publisher. But that's what brought Ulf back in, he told me. So Cy Berry's my favorite artist. But I like everybody. I love Sal Voluto, Paul Ryan, Doug Klauber. I mean, they all have their strengths, one might draw devil better, for example. One might do better with hero. But overall, with everything, Sideberry's my favorite.
Yeah. So do you still read the the newspaper strips in your paper today? And
one sad thing, I guess because of the computer age or whatever, our particular paper, we used to have two newspapers in Baltimore, the News American, which was the one that I think Lee worked for, and in the mid-'60s, they went out of business. So the main paper and the only paper, major paper, is the Baltimore Sun. And they ran the Phantom every day and dailies in color up to about 6 years ago. And I think it got to be a point where they could save money by not paying King Features X amount of dollars to reprint the Phantom.
Yeah.
And I think that's happened to a lot of the newspapers in the States. So I can get them online, and but usually Bob Griffin sends them to me. So yeah, I do keep up with the latest stories. There's one called Return of the Locust about Walker Stable right now.
Yep.
Yeah. So what are your thoughts of Jeff Weigel and Mike Manley?
Well, from artistic standpoint, they're both good. I think I noticed on Manley's Phantom, seems like his head is a little bit smaller than the body. And there's something odd shaped, not all the time, but in some panels. Jeff Weigel, I think I like his art a lot. I haven't seen as much of Weigel as I have of Manley. And by the way, I did meet Mike Manley at the Baltimore Comic Con a couple of years ago.
Of course you did.
Try to keep in touch with him, but he's very hard to get a hold of.
Yeah.
He's very busy. But out of the two, I think right now the rendition of the Phantom I really like by Jeff Weigel. Got to see more of him.
Yeah, in his current story, he's in very good form with the mooding and the lighting and the colouring and stuff like that.
And I think too that he's only 7 or 8 months into his run too.
I agree. So,
give him
it's
time
hard
to
judge, but I'm just first impression.
Yeah, I'm really loving his work as well, and I can only imagine how much better it's going to get over the coming times as he gets more into the rhythm of it.
Okay. I'm a good friend of Tony DePaul, the writer, too. He's quite an interesting guy. He lives in Rhode Island. Yeah, I think Rhode Island. And he's a big motorcycle fanatic, Harley Davidson. And he does a lot of touring around the country. So if you ever see motorcycles in the story, he knows what he's talking about.
Yeah. That saga of Johnny Hotwire was very, very true to form, wasn't it?
Yeah, and he's a good guy to talk to. He's a lot of fun.
We've done an interview with him, and I think he's promised us a podcast interview as well. So looking forward to talking to him about that.
I can't wait for that one.
So have you met? Because I think you've mentioned how you went over to Sweden. Did you meet many people and creators over there? And was that a good time?
I had lunch with and dinner with Hans Lendl. We're very close. We talk about once every 2 weeks. He's a very interesting guy. I was hoping to meet Kerry Lepinen, but the week I was over there, he and his wife went to Canary Islands for vacation. So I didn't get to meet him. And I did, however, attend the Swedish Family Club at this school area or college area classroom. And they had, it was about 35 or 40 members. And it was quite different than my Australian experience. And part of that was because of how Richard and Tony DiDeo, helped the hospital out. and they have really neat things that you can buy and, bid
Yeah.
on, which made it interesting. And of course, the food was great. In Sweden, it was more or less talking about the Phantom, and they're asking questions to John Bedoni and I, and I brought them over a lot of. I had a big bag of goodies, and I made sure everybody got something, and I had a great experience over there. But to answer your question exactly, Hans Lendl and Michael Soul I met. And of course, Ulf Gromberg, we had a great dinner with him, and he showed me all of his art and almost every little toy and knickknack that the company ever made to endorse the Phantom. Stuff like a 2-liter bottle of drink with the Phantom family on it, the two kids and Diana and Phantom. And then, of course, they made a small bottle of the same stuff with a different label. And then, of course, the cans of drink they called Jungle Juice or something, Swedish. And that was interesting.
Yeah. I've always been fascinated with Hans Lindell. He's probably one of my all-time favourite artists and stuff. So when you showed me the original art of him, I really enjoyed that moment.
I have another one back there I can show you at another point. It's a pencil drawing that I know I have some more in my hello?
Yep.
Okay.
Sure.
I have more in my boxes back there, but I didn't pull them out. So I don't want to waste our time now, and we'll do it another time. Yeah. Had I known he was your favorite, or one of your favorites over there.
Yeah.
Terry Leppin is one of my favorites too. He's really an excellent artist. He does a lot of detail, and I met him about 20 years ago. Meet him, we talked 20 years ago, and separated from his wife, and I lost contact. And at that juncture in our relationship, he was going to do a color portrait for me of the Phantom. And years later, when we made contact, he made good on that and sent me the most beautiful color shot of the Phantom on Hero riding past the skull cave, and it's absolutely magnificent. So I like Terry a lot.
Yeah, I like his art looks very good in black and white.
Yes. I like Cesar Spadari a lot too.
Yes. Haven't seen much of him lately.
No, in fact, I sent him a couple packages. He's in Argentina. And just to send him little Phantom goodies here and there. And it's something weird with the government. They wouldn't allow him to get it. So they sent it back to me, and this went on for like 4 months. I tried it one way in registered mail. They sent it back in regular mail. So we just keep in touch. He sends me, I usually send him a Christmas card, and he'll write me on the internet. And he knew the package was over there, and he tried to talk to the government officials. They wouldn't let him get his package. Why? I don't know. I don't know what's going on. But that's sad. He's a good friend, though.
So a pretty clear theme that I'm certainly picking up here, Pete, is that you have spoken to and become friends with and chat regularly with just about all the big names. So many different Phantom creators. What's the how do you go about that? What do you do? How do you make these relationships?
Well, a big help in that was knowing both Jim Shepard and Kerry and Ulf Gromberg. Ulf Gromberg gave me the connection to some of the Swedish people, and Hans Lendl was very good in English. So was Kerry Leppinen too. So they were easy to talk to.
Yeah.
And as far as Cy Berry, that was an interesting way that we met Cy, and I have to really thank the late and great Ed Rhodes for that. We both wanted to meet Cy, but Cy would not answer his email, and it was another story connected with his brother. His brother was doing some things, his late brother, and he thought it was his brother trying to pull crazy shenanigans on him. But anyway, They did not make amends until his brother was on his deathbed, but they did square that away. But anyway, we met a guy named which guy from Brazil? He worked with Cy. I'm having a brain freeze.
I know the guy. I know the. What's his name?
He was a close friend with Cy, and he's the guy that did all the love scenes on the Eden, and he did all the animals. He was a great artist for animals, and so he and Cy were good friends. So when they did stories about where the engagement and Phantom had to kiss Diana, I think he penciled those.
Oh.
He was very good at that. And so Cy inked those. And of course, Joe Giello of Batman fame also.
Is it Joe Giello? Oh no, Andrew LeBlanc.
Andre LeBlanc, yeah, that's who I was trying to think of. Andre was born in Brazil, painted in Cuba. He told me a story. He was painting for money so he could eat. After a hurricane in Cuba, he was cleaning his brushes and the water going in the gutter. And he cleaned his brushes and paint. He was selling his paintings. But he and I got to be very good friends. What a knowledgeable person. You could talk to him about everything, anything and everything, and he had so much information, but he wasn't a know-it-all. He never put it in your face. He was just a great, great person. Well, anyway, Ed met Andre, and he was saying how we would love to interview Cy Berry. He said, I can make that happen. So he said, I'll talk to Cy, and Cy said, yes, we'll talk, that's good. So Ed talked to Cy, and then he gave me his number, and I talked to Cy, and then we set up a luncheon, and we all went, and we've been friends ever since.
So is that the beginning of the Sardi's lunches, the legendary Sardi's dinners?
Well, no, the legendary Sardi's luncheon started actually around 1992, 91, 92, when we invited Lee Falk, and we kept bringing. We usually do it in May or June, corresponding with Jim Shepard's coming to the States to do whatever legal work they had to do with King Features. And so it would be Jim Shepard and Judith, Lee Falk. At first it was Bob Griffin, myself, and Ed Rhodes. And then we got to the point where Jim got tied up, so we asked Lee to come to dinner, which he was very happy to do, at Sardi's. And Sardi's was picked, by the way, because it was where Lee Falk used to go to way back during World War II, when he was out of the service. He was in the service for a while. A funny story about that Lee told us. He had KP duty, and he was peeling potatoes. And this guy comes in, he says, are you Lee Falk, the author of author of The Phantom? And he said, yes. He says, get your butt up, I'll peel these potatoes for you. So Lee was very happy to oblige and let the guy peel the potatoes as he talked to him. So he was a good guy, and he had a lot of good stories. But,
I remember, I can't remember if it was in a Friends of the Phantom magazine or not, but Ed, he showed some pictures of Andre's. He did the treehouse. There was.
Oh yes, he gave Ed the original sketch that he did of the treehouse, beautifully done. And I was so impressed with it, and I had a great idea. I said, Andre, I love the treehouse, the design of it, and I was wondering if I could commission you to do something very special for me. So what I had him do, and I still have it, he did the treehouse as he had given Ed, but in blocks all around the treehouse, on the periphery, all around, he did a drawing about the life of the Phantom as a young boy, and with the wedding, and it was like a whole life cycle of the Phantom around that tree.
Wow.
Which I thought was really cool, and I still have that. So.
Yeah, that sounds amazing. He was Yeah, Cyberry had a lot of good assistants.
He did, and there's some other ones too that I met that weren't as well known as Joe Giella and Andre LeBlanc. I think this guy name was Steinberg or something. He was a younger guy, and he had a lot of proof pages he was going to give to me. But prior to me meeting him, he threw them all away. It was really sad, because to me that's historical.
Yeah.
Yes.
I tell you what we have. This is of interest to you. George Olson did the penciling of the Phantom for a lot of years. And he was good friends with Ed and I. And he was getting up in age. I think he was close to 90 and getting somewhat senile. But I paid for it to happen. And instead of splitting them up, George Olson sent in boxes. It cost me $250 for the postage. But he sent all of the proof pages and little sketches on vellum, which is almost like a translucent paper, with the Lee Falk printed lines for the story. And I told them, Ed and I agreed that Ed would keep them together because he knew more about the stories than I did. And he was helping the current artists, like if they needed, a certain aspect from one of the older stories, like what, Lolongo tribemen would look like, or this or that, Phantom Peak, he would have it. And Ed's wife still has it. I'm trying to get that because I don't want her to sell that. Number one, I paid to get it over here, and it was a gift from George, and we were supposed to split it. But I have to get up to Ed's house and see if I can pick those up. It's quite a bit of paper material.
So would most of Ed's collection still be together with his wife, would it? Or
I don't know if his sister had thoughts of selling some things, but I don't know if Ed's wife let her do that or not. I talked to his wife's name was Kim. I talked to Kim about 7 months ago, and she, I think, wants me to come up. One thing I'd like to buy from her, if she's willing to sell it, is a beautiful Don Newton splash page. I only have one piece of Don Newton's work, and I really like his art. Very mysterious.
Yeah, no, I love his work as well, but I don't have any of his work.
Yes.
Very few people would.
Yeah,
Paul Maloney has some nice pieces by him.
Yeah, Paul Maloney's, he's got a very amazing collection.
He does, and he's a great guy.
Yes. Well, we won't say that because he listens to this podcast, and we'll never hear the end of it.
Okay. He's a good bloke.
Yeah, no, he's a good friend of everyone on the podcast. Steve, who also helps with the podcast, he's a huge fan of Alex Suviak, and Paul helped Steve get a piece of Alex's original artwork.
I have a lot of Alex Saviak, and we talk maybe once a month. I helped Alex as well as I did with Jim and all to complete their Phantom collection, whatever they needed, because at the time I had multiple copies of almost everything. I wound up helping Jim finish his Avon and his comic book collection from the States. And I did the same thing to Ulf Gronberg and same with Alex Saviak and Lee Falk. Cyberry.
Yeah.
So it's like a mutual kind of giving and taking. And
yes.
I always try to send cards. I get a lot of enjoyment out of having cards made or coming up with a neat idea for Halloween or Thanksgiving. And most recently, I've been paying Sal Voluto to do cards for me. He's doing right now a really cool St. Patty's Day Phantom card, and he sent me the color scheme for it yesterday. It's amazing. I can't wait to send it to you.
Yeah, every time we get a card from you, the wife always enjoys having a look at it, and she gets a good chuckle out of it. She's not much of a fan, but she loves the cards and stuff like that.
Well, they're kind of interesting. I have a good one for Valentine's Day that at the printer right now, so I'll get them out. Valentine's Day is probably not celebrated that much in Australia, but it's February 14th.
It is by all of our wives and girlfriends. Don't worry about that.
I got you, mate. How many opals do you have to buy this year?
Oh my God!
It depends
on how many. It depends on how many Phantom things I've bought in that year.
I'm currently excited about the. Met this guy down in Florida. I never only talked to him, and I met him through a guy in New York that had some coins made by this guy. And this is you've seen some of the coins, and you have some, Jermaine. They're absolutely beautiful, and this new coin is really, really cool. It's got a side done by Joe Giella and a side done by Hans Lendl. And I was really excited to get it. The only problem is he's very secretive. So he probably doesn't have the rights from King, so.
Yeah.
So I think now you bring that up, actually.
I think from memory, that exact story, I think he started or was trying to start a Phantom Club in the 80s.
Yes,
or 90s.
He wanted to do this Phantom Club of America because he has a love of the Phantom. He said years ago down in Florida, they made a Phantom ring. And it was basically more of a cartoon skull. It was well made, and they had a laser do an image cut in of the good mark on either side of the ring. And I think somehow Glenn Ford got that. He traded a guy named Bob Cook, who was kind of an art comic dealer over here in the States. He met him in San Diego, and they did a big trade. And I think the other part of the trade was an original cover from Harvey Comics.
Oh, wow.
I have one Harvey Comic Hits cover, and I have what they did in those days. It was kind of interesting. I actually have two whole stories, but it's not all original art. They would get, I guess, a local artist that worked for the company to do a splash page, and they would take photostats from King Features. And then if they had to add a doorway, or if they had to add a window or a telephone, that would be the part of original art. But there is some original art in it, and I have two whole stories from the Harvey brothers.
I don't even have all of those comics yet, let alone the original art.
Well, I can get them for you, mate. Just talk to Jermaine and we'll work through that. But they did, should have shown them to you when we had the visual. The first one they did was the one I really liked that says Phantom Club of America, and it had a three-dimensional shot of the Phantom head to waist and American flag in the background. And then on the other side, it had the stripes as you would see in the Phantom shorts. And I'm trying to think what was on the side. I think he was just standing there head to the waist too. Can't remember. But the second one he did was similar. Oh, I know what it was. I'm sorry. The one with the American flag, Phantom was on a hero. In 3 dimensions, sort of like a gold tone, all solid color. And on the opposite side, the background was the stripes of the Phantom shorts, and it was a shot from head to the waist of the Phantom with hands on hips, I think. And I really liked that design. And then the next one he designed was smaller, but on the edge of the coin, similar to an American quarter, it had what they call reeded edges, so it had like a texture to it. And it was the same image as Phantom on Hero, a la Cyberry, but it was in full color. And this next one now is shot by Joe Giella and Hans Lendl, which I really like. So, you're interested?
Pete, you bet. Oh, go on.
I'm ready.
Oh no, I was just gonna ask. You mentioned before about approval from King Features and that sort of thing. Having a read through some of the old Friends of the Phantom newsletters, I hadn't realised, I guess until I had a closer look, that you actually got all of the Friends of the Phantom newsletters approved by King Features, and you must have had some,
we did,
some contacts there as well.
We wanted to do that. That was very important to us, and particularly Ed Rhodes, to keep in the good graces of King. And in fact, it was excellent for Ed because anything that came down the pike that was new, they gave Ed a heads up. For example, when the Phantom movie came out, there were little tiny books, maybe about 2 inches to 3 inches tall and about 2 inches wide, telling the story of the Phantom with a photographic cover from Germany. And I was able to get a few of those. King Features sent us a few. And things like that. So anything that came down the pike, stickers or clothing, we knew about. So that was a good connection. And that way, if there was anything, we'd let them read it. If it was anything they wanted us to change, they'd read it and then approve it.
All right. And did you have to pay?
The premiere as well?
No, it was just because it actually cost us money to do it.
Yeah.
We didn't make anything on it. I think if Ed sold any,
if it had been
I think
for
we
profit.
just put it right back into buying the paper and stuff like that.
Sure.
So we weren't in it to make money. We were in it to really promote their character.
Yeah.
I think they like that.
Yeah. Okay.
So you also went to the premiere of the Phantom movie in '96 as well.
I did, but there's a sad story about that. They sent Ed and I a letter, Paramount did, because he actually got a chance to, they wouldn't let me come. He actually interviewed Billy Zane. It was quite interesting. And George Olsen he interviewed. But anyway, they said the Phantom movie, we want to send you a premiere ticket. I was teaching at the time, and it was during the week, so I took off. I used a personal day. They give us 2 a year, and I used one for something else, a doctor's appointment or something. So I had one left, and I went up there, and it was fantastic. But basically, it was the New York press at the screening, the very first screening. Well, a week later, I get a call from Ed. He said, Pete, can you come up to New York again? I said, Ed, I'm done with my days. I can't get off anymore. He said, well, guess what? Billy Zane's going to be there with Lee Falk and his family. So when I couldn't go, he let another friend that was in the Friends of the Phantom that lived in New York, he gave him my ticket. But that was a day to go there. They had Phantom cookies, for example, that you could eat during the intermission. They presented Lee with a Phantom solid bronze statue, sculpted, Paramount did, and a pair of gold Phantom rings. Not like what I have, but a thinner type, Ed was telling me.
Oh, wow.
So where they are now, I have no idea. I guess either his wife has them.
Yeah.
Or, I don't know if you guys know it or not, but at this past year, at the San Diego Comic-Con, Elizabeth Falk was there with I guess, a personal assistant. And what she was doing is selling original art.
Oh.
And he had a lot of early Cyberry, and they, maybe some other artists, no Wilson McCoy, probably Fred Fredericks, and some by Keith Williams. And Dan Herman got to see it first from Hermes Press, and he said he bought several $1,000s worth of the early Cyberry, which was absolutely beautiful. I haven't seen it.
Because his reprints are coming up towards being in the Cyberry era.
Oh, yes. I'm really looking forward to that. And if he needs me to write anything, he wants Cy to do a special drawing for it. So he tried to ask me to ask Cy, but that's business, and I don't want to get in the middle, because if you have problems with price, I don't want to get in the middle of that.
Yeah.
So he was supposed to take care of it. Whether it happens or not, I'll find out.
Yeah, I've managed to pick up Dan's got a couple of Cyberry originals, and I've got one as well. I got mine from the Lee Falk estate, and then I think Dan got his from Cyberry himself.
Yeah, that's right.
Fantastic.
Yeah. Oh, and
Cy was very gracious. You don't find many men like him.
We managed to interview him on the podcast as well. It was a real good fun time.
Yeah.
He's such a good speaker, and Ed and I were privy several times to watch Cy work in what they call a chalk talk, talking about how he draws the Phantom. And he was working with a 6th grade class up in New York State, near where he lived in Long Island. And he was just fantastic with kids. His demeanor, his manner. He'd make a great art teacher, or just a great teacher.
That's actually what he's doing now, isn't it?
He's doing that in his spare time, and he's working with seniors. I've been trying to encourage him, and he could do it. He took a class in sculpting. And when I was visiting him up in Jericho, which is where he used to live, which was on Long Island, but now he lives further out in Holbrook. In Jericho, he had this beautiful sculpture of a lady in a dress like the wind was blowing. And I tell you, it looked like the lady could move. That's how well it was sculpted. And I said, Cy, you need to do a Phantom, an action Phantom. So he said, I'm going to surprise you one day and do one. But he hasn't done it yet.
So speaking of, you've spent a lot of time talking with Cy at different times and talking with Lee Falk. Did you ever spend time with the two of them together? And what was your understanding? Because those guys worked together for 33 years. What was your feeling of how they worked together?
That was interesting because when I talked to Lee Falk about it, everything was peaches and cream. Everything was real rosy. Yeah, we had good relationship. But when you talked to Cy, it wasn't quite the same.
Yeah.
He would send them impossible things to do, to draw, and they would have to think how they could incorporate it. I remember the story I'm thinking about in particular that gave Cy fits was the Phantom Out West. They did a story about the Phantom. It was gunslingers and the whole bit, but it was problems with what it looked like, the background. And Lee wanted it a certain way, and Cy said, in reality, it's not that way or something. So they went back and forth. Lee was notoriously late sometime. So what happens then, if the storyline is late, they have less time to do the art. And then they have to burn the midnight oil. And when you rush, the art doesn't come out as good as you know.
Yeah.
You saw that in probably the latter years of Wilson McCoy, where the body shape of the Phantom, because he was doing the dailies and the Sundays, and he had to get them out quickly, became shorter and squatter in a way. I don't know if you noticed that, but I did. But Cy was smart enough. Lee did not know he had all the assistants. He thought Cy did everything. He didn't know that until toward the end, when Cy retired. But Cy needed to get away for vacation. He called in Joe Giel and Andre LeBlanc. There was a couple other really good artists too.
There was George Olsen, which we talked about.
George was good.
Keith Williams.
Bob Forgone.
Yes.
Rick Buckler and Carmen Infantino.
Yes. But his main go-to guys in his inner circle were Andre and Joe. And here's a story on Joe Giel. It's quite interesting. Growing up from grade school, Cy Berry, Joe Giel, a guy named Al Scaduta, who was a good cartoon artist. He did Little Iodine and a strip called They'll Do It Every Time that went on for years and years, which was originally done by an artist named Jim Hatlow. But he was as good as Hatlow, I think. So Cy Berry, Joe Giel, Al Scaduta, and an Italian guy named Emilio Squiglio. And Emilio was known for his work on Captain Marvel. So those four guys went to school together, elementary school, all dated the same girls, and were friends forever. And there was one other name he told me about, and you'll be surprised. Tony Bennett, the singer.
Oh?
They were all friends, yeah. And they're about the same age. Tony's close to 90 or is 90. But Emilio passed away as well as did Al Scaduto. Al Scaduto maybe about 8 years ago, and Emilio maybe 2 years after that. And both were great guys.
So I think from another article from the Friends of Phantom, you've got to meet and interview Claire Moore, Ray Moore's widow.
Yeah, we did, but that Ed had to do that by telephone. We found her. She was in home for the elderly, assisted living. But she was clear of mind, very nice. And, of course, Ed and I were very interested in how Ray Moore came up with the costume of the Phantom. And because Lee Falk told us one thing at a Friends of the Phantom dinner, and then we found out through Claire it was quite different. And here's the difference. Lee said that he actually came up with the costume and drew the first 2 weeks of the Phantom. Well, that could not be true because I have an actual drawing of the Phantom by Lee Falk, and so did Ed.
I think I've seen that one.
Yeah, and you could tell that he just doesn't have the artistic ability. Great writer. But here's what Claire Moore said is probably closer to the truth. And the whole truth lies somewhere in between. But on a weekend when he first got this idea and King Features approved, he knew Ray Moore from his hometown in Missouri. And Ray Moore was an assistant. I think he worked with Mandrake artists for a while. So Lee got in touch with Ray Moore, and they decided to have a weekend seminar with a couple other artists. She didn't remember their names, and they all huddled together, and Lee Falk was telling them that his idea of the Phantom is all from the classic stories of literature. He's a little bit of Robin Hood and a little bit of Sir Walter Raleigh and a little bit of the Hangman and Ivanhoe and all this kind of stuff. So they were thinking about, they wanted a kind of a menacing look. So they sort of did the hood of the, what you would call a hangman back in the Middle Ages. And they gave him, of course, the mask. And That's and the skin tight costume and the German riding boots. So that was probably Ray Moore and whatever artist came up with that idea from what Lee told them. But as far as Lee drawing them, I don't think that happened, because even on the pages of his type pages, he'll do little stick characters. He was better at that. And so I think that really is, and being very honest, I think it probably is the truth of how the Phantom got his costume as it looks, today.
Mm. That's very interesting. I'm just trying to think some of the other interesting articles that I found that I remember. One of the ones I liked was George Wilson, who did the Avon covers as well?
Yeah, he didn't do everyone, but he did most of them, and he did a lot of the Gold Key covers.
Yes.
You want to hear the story of him?
Oh, I would love to hear stories about all of these types of people.
I loved his artwork so much on the Gold Keys because they were lifelike and they were paintings and colorful. And he had a very good knack, if you think about those Gold Key covers, especially when there are explosions. Yeah. One in particular, he's on top of a tile roof, sort of like looks like Italy or Mediterranean place in Mediterranean, and there's a big explosion going off, and he's fighting all these pirates on the roof. If you look at that cover, I can't remember the number offhand. The guy in the window is George Wilson. He did a self-portrait. He is the pirate in the window, and that's exactly what he looked like when I met him. And that was really kind of a neat thing. Well, anyway, I wanted to meet George Wilson. Ed could not find any information on him. So out of the clear blue, I got the number up in New York for the Guild of Comic Artists. And I called up there and I said, hi, I want to interview an artist by the name of George Wilson. I was wondering if you had a current telephone number. So the guy says, give me a moment, please. And he said, I do. And he sent me the number. And I remember being kind of very nervous, like the first time I talked to Cy, because in my mind, these guys were legends.
Yeah.
But I talked to George, and he was very nice. But he didn't have a lot of credence. He didn't give himself a lot of credit. He said, oh, it's just something that I did. He said, I did a lot of other war stuff that you might be interested. I said, I do like all of your work, George. I said, but I'm just fascinated with the Phantom. So then he got the point that that's what I wanted to talk about. So I said, George, what would be the possibility of doing a painting for me? He says, oh, I don't have the rights from King Features. If you could get a letter for me. So I called up King Features, our contact at that time, wrote me a letter, and I sent it to George Wilson. So he said, okay, I will do it for you. And he says, how can I get it to you? I said, how about if Ed Rhodes and I come up and meet you? And he said, that would be great. So he lived in a place in New York, had an unusual name called Hastings on Hudson. That's the name of the area, which is off the Hudson River. And it's actually a half hour from where Luke McDonald was living in Peekskill, New York, which was a little north of that. So Ed and I, on a weekend, I drove up on a Friday night after school, spent overnight with his damn dog licking my face all night. Didn't get much sleep. But got up early, and we drove up to Luke McDonald's house. And Luke McDonald was married to an African-American lady, a writer named Carol, very nice. He had 2 children at the time, and we had a beautiful interview. It's in the newsletter as well. And I was able to buy 5 or 6 or 7 pieces of Luke's DC art.
Yeah.
One in particular I really liked. I got #1 cover where he's on the skull throne. If you remember that comic.
Sure.
Yes.
And the very last page to the 13-issue series, he's kissing Diana in a bridal gown. And I have that
Yes.
picture as well. Those two were very memorable to me.
Mm.
But so we interviewed Luke up until maybe from around 9 in the morning to around 1 in the afternoon. So then we drove about 35 to 40 minutes, and we're supposed to meet, I thought, at this restaurant bar called the Hastings House. Now, George lived by himself and was currently doing freelance work for an army magazine, and he would do covers like shots of paintings of the Civil War battles or World War II, and they would have stories about that genre. So that's what he was currently doing to make money. And his favorite hobbies were shooting at targets. He loved target shooting. He used to do that quite often. And so we were supposed to meet at the Hastings on Hudson, and we're waiting, and it's 3 o'clock, and George isn't there. I called, and no one was at George's apartment. So I didn't know what to do. It's now an hour, and we should have been there. What happened was he thought we were coming to his apartment, which I would have preferred. But he did tell me to go to the Hastings house. So he eventually went back to the house. We made contact, and he came. And they didn't serve food for about another hour after that. So we interviewed him in this little room in the back where they served food. No one bothered us. So he said, "Peter, here's your painting." And that was the painting that I showed you in the back room. Mm. And he gave Ed the sketch to that. So,
wow. So
interesting. What was that?
Sorry, I was just going to say the comic that you were talking about was Gold Key #8.
Yes, yes. He is a pirate in the window.
In the window.
It's George Wilson, and trying to think. He said he did like 8 or 9 of the Gold Key, not all of them. He pointed out the 2 that he did not do, and the 2 that he did not do, I saw on the walls at King Features when I went up to meet the guy that was in charge of the archives up there, Mark Johnson. And he had like 4 of the Avon paperbacks.
Oh, wow.
Beautifully done. So I just missed the Avon paperback. I went to a comic show in Baltimore County. And of course, I always say, I'm looking for anything Phantom. The guy said, "You missed it by 1 show." And I said, "Can you describe the painting?" And guess which one it was? The one that George Wilson did his portrait on.
Oh.
So I said, "Well, how much did it sell for?" He said, "I had a Tarzan cover and I had this Phantom cover." And he said, "I sold them each for $500.
Oh.
I would have paid that in a heartbeat. But, oh well, I said that was the one that got away, so to speak.
So has there been any other interviews or stories from either from the Friends of the Phantom or anything else you'd like to share with us?
I'm trying to think if there's anything special. I wanted to interview the Swedish artist because I had contact with Terry Lepinen and Ed did not, and Hans Lendl. But he was very reluctant for me to do it. And his reasoning is that by trade he was an artist, and he said he knew what questions. I said, "Ed, I'm literate. I know how to ask questions. I may not," but so that never took place. And that's one thing that I wish could have happened. We had nice interviews with Ulf Gromberg and found out a lot about Egmont and the workings and Ulf's interest in Egmont, in the Phantom, and all.
He would be a great person to get on the podcast, Ulf.
Oh, he would do it as well. He's very articulate.
Oh, okay.
Has a nice speaking voice, and he could tell you so many stories, as he told me. And we did a lot of traveling when he came to the States, so I heard every story that was available about Ulf Gronberg. But he would be a great guy for a podcast.
Oh, we
Now,
might have to get you to do an introduction for us.
Oh, of course. And
what did we have a lot of banter over here about Lee Falk stories versus the Scandinavian stories and who creates what, whatever. Did you get a bit of a feeling from Lee Falk when you spoke to him at various times about what he thought of other people writing Phantom stories?
Yes, I did. I asked him about how he felt about the Swedish stories, and he really liked them for the most part. What he really enjoyed, he told me in an interview, just personal interview, that when he went to Sweden, he went to a place called Park and Zoo, which is about an hour, I think, northwest of Stockholm, where they had a Phantom land and a zoo. And they had like a skull cave and a radio room. Yeah. And when they introduced that, opened it up, they invited Lee Falk. And he felt so proud that his character would come to life in a sort of like a quote-unquote theme park. You know, sort of like a mini Disney, so to speak, with the Phantom walking around. And they had a little place where the kids could cross a little body of water on a pull raft, and of course the zoo connection with the animals. So he really liked that. As far as the stories, he liked most of them. I suggested a story to him, and he said, "I'd rather you not tell me because it may get me mixed up. I don't want to use somebody else's ideas." So that was on a personal note. I thought I had a really good idea for a Phantom Mandrake crossover, but he said, "Please don't tell me." So what happened with that, I actually told Hans Lendl when he was the editor after Ulf retired, and Hans actually worked my idea in one of his stories.
Wow.
Which was about, and it changed from, but the original part was the Phantoms riding across a ravine, and there's a landslide, and as the Phantom turns, there's a mouth to a cave that opens up, and he's quite interested, and he explores it, and he finds a skeleton in a deteriorated Phantom costume, and how he goes back and finds out what happened, and then from there they did their own thing with it, but that was my idea. And then when I went to visit John Bedoni in New Zealand, and we went to I don't know if you guys have been to New Zealand.
Yeah, once.
Okay, it's North Island, South Island. John lives in Auckland in the North Island, and he has a home in the Bay of Islands, which is a drop-dead gorgeous place
yes.
Up on a cliff looking down, and he has a wonderful study, and he's very well read. We actually wrote a Phantom story about the Phantom coming to the Bay of Islands. And John had all the artist information. We did drawings. And I presented it to Hans Lendl. And he said he was going to have, I think, Donnie Averell. Is that it? Something
yes,
like
he's
that.
The writer,
yeah.
Yeah, because I think he is New Zealand, from New Zealand.
Yes, I think you're right.
And so he was supposed to use that idea and then write the story, but Hans Lendl left, and I guess it went with him. But there are a couple of things that you might be interested in.
Yeah.
Yes. So you've done a little bit of traveling with because of the Phantom.
Yes.
So you've come to Australia, which was what? Oh, that would have been about 6-7 years ago.
I was there for the big Fru Bash when the Phantom turned 50.
Yep.
And there's a guy from Australia that lives in the States now by the name of Paul Whittle. And we got to be quite good friends. And in his business, it was computer related, he would go to Australia like every 2 weeks. So he had a lot of frequent flyer miles. So he offered his frequent flyer miles to me to get me over there, and I took care of the rest. But it was such a wonderful time. We were down in the area called the Rocks,
Yep.
near the harbor, and I had a beautiful place there. And I could walk right to Jim's office, and I got to see a lot of that part of Sydney, which was quite interesting. And then I went to the Taronga Zoo with Billy Higgins, Richard Fry, Bob Griffin, and Tony DeDeo. So, it was quite cool to hang out with those guys. And I think at that time, Billy Higgins took me, trying to think of the name of the store that sold Phantom downtown.
The Phantom Zone?
Phantom Zone, yes. I don't know if that was owned by Renee then or not, but
I think it was
Glenn. Glenn, okay. That was quite fun. Well, Glenn wasn't there that day, but that was quite interesting to see the stores. And then, of course, I had to have a McDonald's burger in Australia. That was quite cool. The second time it came is the time you're talking about when John and I came over, and it was the Supernova. And that was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed that. I got to see the Blue Mountains. And is it the Three Sisters rock formation?
That's right, yep.
I really enjoyed that. And we took, of course, the ride across the ravine with the glass bottom car. So that was really, had a lot of fun. And Debbie enjoyed that very much. But what happened was John's wife's name is Kenda. Kenda and my wife, Debbie, went up to the Noosa area and explored, and that left John and I open to meet all the Phantom dignitaries. John, I had a lot of connections, even though I hadn't met everybody. And, of course, that's when I met Jermaine for the first time, I believe.
Yes, that was the first time we met.
Great to meet you. And I think that was at the Supernova the first time we actually said hello.
Yes,
and,
I believe it was.
You and your buddy, I can't remember his name, but good bloke.
Yeah, I think it might have been Luke Gagan, I think it might have been.
Yeah, I think it was. Yeah. And I had a great time at the, it was fun because when Richard set up the dinner, he had a little picture of me as I appeared in the newspaper by Graham Nolan. And it looked just like me. So after the whole night was finished, it was quite late, and Debbie and I got ready to leave, and he got the microphone and said, Pete Klaus is leaving the building, like Elvis, Elvis is leaving the building. So I thought that was quite cool.
Yeah, the dinners, Dan went to his first one last year.
Yeah.
Oh. Wow.
And I've managed to go to a majority of them ever since. So it's they're a great time.
It really is. And, to get to see the various things that are donated that you might not get to see, and even if you can't afford them or you can't bid on them, it's so cool to look at to see what's out there.
Yeah.
I have one thing I want to mention to you, you might find of interest. We were talking about collecting the Phantom, and I'd mentioned the Halloween costumes that I was keen on trying to get every costume. The earliest Phantom costume came out, I think, right around 1940, and it consisted of a purple suit with a hood, a mask, but the only way you could know that it was a Phantom costume was by a 6-inch belt that had a skull and crossbones on, and it said the Phantom and KFS 1940. I was able to. What was that?
No, it was just wow. That's really early.
That is the earliest one that I could find, and I was able to find the belt, not the actual material. But I did see the whole costume on Hake's auction, and it was already sold by the time I got a chance to bid on it. But I have the most interesting part of it, and that is the only part that identifies it as a Phantom costume. And then from that point on, I have every costume that I could find by Collegeville, and it might be 8 or 9 different. And they would change the front picture on the chest, the graphic on the chest, and the mask a little bit each year or each time they needed a change. And then a company called Ben Cooper did them toward the end. And then when the movie came out, they had a beautifully well-made Phantom costume in Spain. And I have that. It came with guns and the mask and the cowl. In fact, in one of the newsletters, Howard Jesbeck's wife is dressed as the Phantom wearing that particular costume. Huh. So if you go back and look, you can see that might be the issue where I do all the Halloween costumes.
Yeah, I think I remember that one.
The hardest thing that I found to find, and to know what that was out there, were the little, what they call rack pack toys. A rack pack toy is a little cheap plastic toy usually on a cardboard card with a clear plastic sheeting over it. They used to hang on a rack, and they would sell from 29 cents to $1.29. And Giroux, and there was one other company that I can't think of offhand that made these sets, but they did stuff like the Phantom Jungle play set. And they would have like 3 little plastic animals, a chimp, a tiger, or a lion, maybe a palm tree, and a little 2 or 3 inch high plastic Phantom piece. And it came on a little card, rack pack card. Yeah. And then the same company made something called the Jungle play set, which was sort of like a truck that you saw in the Phantom movie with the canvas backing and a few animals there. And then it was one other offshoot of that same idea. Might have been the Phantom train set. One of the most bizarre toys that I picked up was a Phantom knife. And I'll tell you why it's bizarre. It's just rubber, and it has a sort of like a tiger sheath that this little rubber knife sits in. And what was interesting is that this knife was actually made for a Tarzan toy. So the company, having the rights to make the toys, took a picture of the Phantom flying on a pterodactyl from a prehistoric time, sort of like you would see Tarzan fly on in the comic book. Right. And there's our Phantom on top of the pterodactyl. So that's one of the most bizarre toys they made. They did a camera that shoots water, like a trick camera, Phantom camera. Yeah. And they did another one that would, by sliding the finger, would send Morse code or green light and a red light. I do have that one. I don't have the water one. And they did 2 different water pistols, a plain 45 on a card with the graphic of one of the Phantom novels. And then the other was a little earlier. It was a rack pack toy with the Phantom water pistol, same pistol, but it had a holster with it. And I was very keen on finding how many different toys came out, especially in the early 60s and 70s of the Phantom. And Bob Griffin has a nice collection of them, ones I hadn't seen before. And then I tried to collect all the rest because I wanted to write about them. I wanted Phantom collectors to know what was out there. That was my driving force.
So, yeah, you have thought about producing a book at different times, or
yes. Well, the big story was Chris Smith's grandiose idea. He was going to pay for the book. Ed Rhodes was going to write all about the Phantom artist and the Phantom. My job was to write about the Phantom collectibles.
Yep.
And of course, I think what Chris wanted to do was get his name in there so people would contact him as the
to buy
producer
stuff.
of the book to get more stuff. That's what Ed thought, so, and I said it probably true.
Yeah.
But it never came to fruition because right after that, I think problem with his wife and separation and divorce and whatever. And at that time, Ed's relationship with Chris went downhill.
So back to your own collection, Pete. If we had a bit of a collector's special, I can't remember now, a couple of months ago, and one of the questions we asked then was, if there was a, God forbid, if there was a fire or something like that going through the house and you could save one item from your Phantom collectible, forget about how far back it is in boxes in storage or whatever, but if you could only save one item to take out of the house, what would it be?
Probably the infamous Phantom Sirocco in the original box.
In the original box? See, that's up a level. I don't think I've ever heard about it being in an original box.
Yeah, here's the story. I have one, and Howard Jesbeth has one. I'll tell you the story of mine first, and I'll tell you about his. He has a very interesting story as well, but I found the Sirocco from a guy in California. He didn't know exactly what it is. He just called it a little wooden figure. And this is early on, and I didn't really know what it was, but anything Phantom I was willing to buy. So he said, $85. I said, done. So I bought it for $85, and it came, and it was beautiful. And I wanted to learn more about it. My one friend knew that it was a Sirocco, and he mentioned that King Features put them out, and they were sort of like what they call a premium. When you would send in a quarter and a coupon, you would get one of these figures. But I never had the box. I always wanted to see a box. So I found about a guy down south who collected Siroccos, and he did not have a Phantom box, but he said he had all the boxes were the same except the characters were in little circles on the box, but the way that made it a Phantom box, it was imprinted the word Phantom on the end. So that's what really makes it the Phantom box. And they're quite hard to find. But anyway, he was able to make me a Phantom box, which was the first one that I had. And I stored my Sirocco in there. Later on, I did a show in Atlantic City, New Jersey. And a guy walked by that I recognized his name. His name was Danny Fuchs, Fuchs. Danny Fuchs is a premier Superman collector, but he also likes the Phantom. So we were talking. He says, "You know what I have you might be interested in?" He said, "I have an original Phantom Sirocco box." He said, "It's pristine mint." I said, "Well, what do you want for it?" He said, $275. I said, "For a box? Are you crazy?" He said, "Oh, it's very rare." I said, "Well, could you come down a little?" So we settled on $200. So I sent for it, and that's how I got my Phantom and the Sirocco box.
Wow.
Howard Jesbeck, on the other hand, was on the internet, eBay, and found the lady that had one. Not only did she have the Phantom in the box, she had the original letter written to the company, and he got everything. But he didn't pay $85 and $200. He paid like $13.50.
Yeah.
Oh,
and he got everything. But he's got the
Right.
letter, and he's got the original box and pristine mint Sirocco. And they used to have, I guess when they painted them by hand, they mixed the colors. So some of the Siroccos look purple, some look sort of like a greenish color. He's got a couple color variations, but that wasn't important to me really to collect the color variations.
Yeah.
I was happy with what I had.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, clearly, if that's still the the number one piece in the collection, sort of thing.
Yeah, only because you just don't see it,
Yeah.
That's
I think
have
the
other
Sirocco
pieces.
is probably one of the top, like, grail items for most collectors.
I agree with that. I remember being at this is before Howard had a Sirocco figure. I was up in I had already had mine for a couple of years, and I met a dealer up in Antique Market in Central PA near Reading, Pennsylvania, and he said, "I have a Sirocco figure." And I said, "You do?" He said, "But it's got a problem." I said, "What?" He said, "It's missing its feet," which I don't know if you guys have seen one in your hand, but it's very narrow down at the feet, and it's the weakest point. And basically, it's sawdust glued together into a mold and then probably hand painted. But anyway, they have a tendency to break at the ankles. And this one, the feet was missing, but it was a Sirocco. And I asked him the price, and he said $75. So I bought it for Howard. So that was Howard's first, and then he wound up buying one from, what had been Chris Smith or one of the guys, and then eventually he got the home run, the one with the box. So that answers your question, I guess, somewhat.
Yeah, I've got one missing the feet as well.
I've been lucky enough to go and see a collection, Gary Horn in Brisbane, who actually has 3 Siroccos standing side by side. But he's never mentioned a box. So, Gary, if you're listening to this, now you've got something else to chase.
The facsimile box that I had that was made for me looks just like it. Almost the same kind of cardboard, same color. I gave to Howard Jesbeck when I sent him the one with the feet, missing the feet because I didn't need it.
Yeah.
So I don't know what he ever did with it. He may still have that, which is neat for a collector just to see what it looks like.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And Paul Maloney had one that was unpainted.
Yes,
but,
I heard about that.
Glenn Ford claimed they didn't think it was a Sirocco that was made by the company, but rather maybe one of these 3D imaging items. I don't know. I couldn't tell. I was excited to see it, but just mentioning what Glenn didn't think it was original. But
So one of the other questions, Pete, that we talked about when we had this collector's special is long-term plans for the collection, and obviously you've got a massively extensive collection, and one of the things we all think about, I guess, is what do we do with it when we go? What are your plans down the track?
It's kind of hard right now. My son is interested. Before I had any real good original art, the one piece that you saw by a guy named Tom Lau was in black and white, and it was the Phantom on Hero, Diana, and the Phantom. He did a Sunday page for me, his own idea, with the Phantom, and he put me in it, and I sort of looked like an Indiana Jones type with a fedora hat, and my son was in it. And Peter was 5 years old when I had that made. And the story surrounded, the strip surrounded the Phantom. Peter and I were in the jungle, and he sees this beautiful bird, and he goes after it and trips down into a ravine, and he sprains his ankle. And I said, Peter, I don't know how I can get you. And all of a sudden, a hand is on my shoulder. He said, I'll help you. Any friend of the Phantom is a friend of mine or something. And the Phantom climbs down on a jungle vine that he cuts, puts a little Pete on his back and saves him, and brings him back to me. So Peter said he'd like to keep that piece for sure. But as far as the other thing, my girls really are not interested in it. Long term, never really thought about it.
That's the way to go.
I might have to send. I would like somebody to have it that would enjoy it. I wouldn't mind sharing it with people around the world, really, truly. Yeah. So, I know John Bedoni likes some pieces, but he's mainly into the written paper, the comic books in particular. In fact, I had almost a complete run of the. Are you familiar with the British Miller comics?
Yes.
Yep.
Little story there. I had like 5 or 6. Could never find many more than that. And I was reading the Buyer's Guide 25 years ago. And the guy in Chicago that I called said, I have a whole set of Millers, 1 to whatever it was, 18 or whatever it went up to. And I said, well, how much do you want for him? He said, $200, which was a lot then to me because raising 3. But my wife, Debbie, was a vice principal of a school, and she won a vice principal of the year. And the McDonald's Corporation flew both she and I out to Chicago, along with all the vice principals from all 50 states, sort of like a little thank you for what you've given to the kids. And I got a free ride with her. So I said, when you go into your meetings, I'm going to go to North Chicago and meet this guy. So unfortunately, I told Chris Smith about it, and he pleaded with me to split them in half, and he either would take the even or the odd. So I had about 5 even or 4 even. So I took the odd so I'd have number 1 since I went to get them. And he took 2 through, even numbers through 18. Well, anyway, John Bedoni needs 1 book to complete that. And at the time, he needed number 1 and number 3. And as a gift, I gave him number 1 and number 3. So I have a handful, but helping people like that is, I think, good. So then if he concentrates on just the written book, at least someone will have it somewhere.
Yeah.
So
it's probably the thing that I love. One of the things that I love about the fandom community, and it's not everyone, but a lot of people are very generous.
I agree. And some can be devious, but even the ones sometimes devious or even good-hearted sometimes.
Yeah, and like there's a lot of people like you've always looked out for me, and I've sent you some stuff.
You've always sent me stuff, and I mean just to know about it is fun for me. And then when we exchange a little with the Phantom, it's even better. And that's my favorite thing about the Phantom. Debbie even said she's not a big Phantom fan, but she likes it because I do. But she said her favorite thing was meeting everybody, the Cy Berries, when he came to Baltimore with his lovely wife, Simi, and another couple, and I treated them to a real nice restaurant here. And people like Ulf Gromberg and Alex Saviak, who stays with me when he comes up from Florida. It's just wonderful. And the things I've learned, and it's just a Phantom community is unlike any other one that I know.
Yeah, have to agree with that.
Yeah, I really do. And I tell you, I'm not saying this because of the podcast, but I think I would have to say Australia is the best Phantom country in the world for many reasons. The ongoing printing of the book, the the great job that Glenn and Renee are doing now to revive stories that were never in print. This new trade paperback in full color with all the important stories that are related to the Phantom's rings and the childhood of the Phantom. Stuff like that makes it new again for me and for other collectors that have been collecting. So hats off to the people in Oz. I love it. Been very gracious to me.
That's awesome. Well, it's probably a good time to kind of wrap up the conversation. Yeah. So I just want to say thanks, Pete. You know, it's been great touching base again, and actually instead of just the email. So thank you for your time.
Truly, it was my pleasure.
I've really enjoyed meeting and talking to you, Peter. You've been a legend. That's sort of no, you have. You know, not
well,
very
you hear
many
names, and it's nice to hear the voice behind them.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
I want to mention one thing about Lee Falk that I did not mention. The second time that I met Lee up in a comic show in New York. After the interviews were all finished, Lee stuck around about 2.5 hours, nearly 3 hours, sitting with me to answer all my questions. And of course, people would come up and ask for an autograph. And I tell you what I liked about Lee. Somebody'd put either a comic book down or get signed. First thing he would just say, "Hi, what's your name? Where are you from?" And he'd usually have a story that he could relate. And that was the great thing about Lee that I really, really thought of as he was signing his autograph. It wasn't this thing like I watched the guy that did the TV Batman signing autographs one time. He's got his head down, signs a book, doesn't talk to the people, and gets $25 per signing. See, that to me is not a good thing. So. The way Lee did it, he did it right. He took time with everybody, as much time as they needed or as much as they wanted to ask. And Cy Berry's the same way.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, but anyway, It was a pleasure talking to you guys. If I can help you with anything at all, and if anything comes down the pike that's new on the family that I can show you, I'll be glad to do that. So with that, I'll say God bless. Thank you. No worries with the technical difficulties. It all worked out.
Thank you very much.
Awesome.
Okay. God bless you and stay well.
500 years ago, he washed ashore the sole survivor of a shipwreck. And upon the skull of the man who killed his dad, he said, "I'm mad, I must eradicate piracy, injustice and cruelty, and all my sons will follow me, so evildoers will believe that this man cannot die." The Phantom, the ghost who walks. The Phantom, enemies beware, the Phantom's always there, but you won't find the Phantom. He finds you